Good morning, Bella Vista. We're back to talk about a very important subject, the upcoming election. And we have today someone who can help us through all the things you need to know that you should know. And I'm so glad to welcome Julie Hall with the the Benton County Election Commission,
Yes.
right?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today, JB.
Well, you know, I really enjoy you. One of your jobs, I think, is to actually train the poll workers, and among many other things. But that's how I met you.
Yes.
And you do an excellent job. So I wanted everybody to benefit from some of your wonderful information. Do me a favor, give me the little elevator speech on who's Julie Hall. You told me a great story about this building today.
I did. It's actually been a great little trip down memory lane for me today, because walking into the building today, this was actually the building where I came to work for the first time, my first job after high school. So back when this building was Cooper Communities, that was my first job. So it's been really fun being here today, just to kind of think about some of those times a while back now.
Absolutely. So how long have you been with the commission?
I actually started in as just a regular election official back in 2012. So
Okay.
this is my 13th year doing elections in various ways. I've been in the commission itself doing some different administrative type of things off and on since about 2018.
Okay. And what do you do, just like what's a typical day for you?
Well, during election season, it looks a lot different than during the off season. But during the election season, at least right now, I'm currently working on programming the ballot. That's one of the things that we're getting ready to have finalized. I'm doing that, getting ready to do some election official training next week. And then after that, we roll directly into testing our equipment and our ballots.
Okay. So we're going to just kind of walk through the process
Okay.
and let everybody kind of know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Some deadlines, some things to check off, etc.
Absolutely.
So let's first start requirements for voting. What's the very first thing that people must do before they can vote?
Well, the first thing I would say would be to make sure you're registered to vote. Now, in Arkansas, and when I talk about these things, I'm speaking specifically in Arkansas.
Okay.
The first thing you do is you have to register to vote. You do have to register at least 30 days prior to any election in order to vote in that election. So the deadline is coming up quickly. So I believe the deadline is October the 7th in order to register to vote for the general election this November.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, and then when you come to the polls or you come to the place to vote, what do you need to do? What do you need to have in your pocket?
Well, you need to make sure that you have photo ID, and that's very important. And it can't just be any photo ID.
I can't use my POA card?
You cannot use your POA card for voting. It gets you into some of the great recreational facilities we have here in Bella Vista. But no, it needs to be an ID that's either issued by the state of Arkansas or that's issued by the federal government. So it does need to have a photo, it needs to have your name, and it does need to be issued by either Arkansas or the federal government.
Does that include veterans, an ID, a veteran's ID? Does that have an ID
Yes, it does.
picture?
Many of the veterans' IDs do contain both the veteran's name and the photo of the veteran, and it is issued by a federal entity.
Exactly.
So the Veterans Administration. So that does meet our qualifications for photo ID.
So it could be a driver's license, it could be your passport, all of that, just so
Yes.
long as those requirements are met.
Yes, and it's very important for people to understand, because we do have a lot of people who are moving into Northwest Arkansas from other states. And so it is important to know that when you do come to vote, if you're going to use a driver's license as your form of photo ID, it must be an Arkansas driver's license.
Good point.
Now, other things like your passport, that would cover you. But if you're going to use a driver's license, please make sure it's from Arkansas.
That makes perfect sense to me. It like you say, it has to have the state name, address, and date of birth.
Yes, so when you come to vote, the first thing you'll probably be asked is to provide a photo ID, and we've talked about that a little bit. But then you also will be asked to state your name and where your address is, because that is then verified based to our voter registration system.
You know, as a poll worker, I have probably even thought this myself, but I've had people say, well, can't you read? It's there on your ID. We want people to say that out loud.
Yes, we do have to ask them to actually state that information.
Okay.
Because that is how the law reads.
Okay, that's right. It's all about laws. Now, what if you come and you really get confused, or you have some sort of some reason that you need some help?
That happens quite a bit. There's a lot of reasons that a person might need some help when they go to vote. The important thing to remember is if you are a person who may need some assistance during voting, it's important that you, the voter, ask for someone to help you. For example, if I were to go in with my daughter to go vote, I can't just announce that I need to help her. If she needs assistance, she would need to be the one to have to ask for that.
Gotcha. That makes sense too. Okay, so I can't come, but I want to vote. I can't come on election day or during early voting. How else could I vote?
Other than early voting and election day? Well, there's always been absentee voting, or at least for as long as I've been aware. If you are not physically able to get out to vote in person, absentee voting is a great option for you. So I would encourage people, if they need an absentee ballot, contact the county clerk's office and they'll be able to help you with that process. And I do kind of, since we're talking about absentee voting, I would love to mention a little bit of a difference. People say, well, what about that? Do you guys do mail-in ballots?
Oh.
Well, that's a little bit of a different connotation in my mind. We don't blindly send out ballots to just everyone. If you need an absentee, you must actually request it, usually at least once a year. They're not sent out automatically. So just because you got one 2 years ago doesn't mean they're automatically going to send you one this year. If you need it, you have to contact the county clerk's office and request it.
And I believe we actually, because we have a great graphics person in the back room, I believe she's actually putting up that location of that website.
That's perfect.
Yeah, she's pretty special. Okay, now with that absentee ballot, you have to send in your photo ID.
Yes, because the ID law that's in place for voting in Arkansas applies to all forms of voting. So yes, when you show up in person, we're going to ask to see your ID. If you send an absentee ballot in, you must include a copy of your photo ID, keeping in mind those same qualifications, either by the state of Arkansas or the federal government.
Okay.
So just make a photocopy of that and tuck it in with your absentee. I would also encourage people to make sure you read all the instructions that come with your absentee ballot as well. And if you have any questions as you're going through that process, if it doesn't make sense what you're reading, go ahead and ask somebody who knows. And by that, I mean, call the county clerk's office if you have questions about absentee voting. But make sure you read and follow the instructions carefully.
And you know, maybe I might add, it's mostly for a valid reason that you do absentee voting. It's not like I just don't feel like going to the voting place. It's really reserved, not reserved, but it's better. The better use of it is if you really have a good reason for not being there.
Right, and there are several reasons that are acceptable to request an absentee. One of the most common is you're just not physically able to get out and vote in person. So a physical disability absolutely qualifies you to receive an absentee. If you're going to be absent, if you're going to be out of town during the entire in-person voting time, that would be a definite reason that you would need to request an absentee. Our college students that go to college out of state, they really should request an absentee.
Good point.
And then also too, there's even like a religious exemption. If you are having an observance of a religious holiday or discipline, you can use that as a reason to request an absentee ballot as well.
You were sharing with me earlier some really cool stats on registered voters in Benton County. You want to talk about that?
So we are actually here in Benton County the second largest voting county in Arkansas. So our current registered voter numbers is over 188,000 voters. So kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around, considering I've been in this area for a long time. But The turnout that we're expecting for this election is pretty high. I went back and looked at some numbers from 2020, which was our last presidential general election. We had about a 70% voter turnout then. So if we're expecting a similar turnout for this election, that's going to be over 130,000 voters that are going to be voting in Benton County. That's a lot of people.
It sure
so
is.
you probably should plan ahead about when to go cast your vote.
You know, so let's talk about that. I really love the fact that we've got so long for early voting. And I know that we're going to have a slide up here in a second about when those dates are and everything. But could you go over that and where, particularly here in Bella Vista, where early voting?
Absolutely. So early voting starts statewide on Monday, October the 21st, and it continues for 2 full weeks prior to the election. And now here, let me talk about Benton County in general first. So in Benton County, we are set up as vote centers. So what that means is, as a registered voter, you can go anywhere in the county that's open and cast your ballot. So if you have a doctor's appointment in Rogers, even though you lived here in Bella Vista, you can stop by a vote center in Rogers and cast your ballot if you'd like to. But here in Bella Vista specifically, since we're here, we do actually have 2 locations open for early voting. The Bella Vista Community Church and the Bella Vista Recreation Center.
The old Reardon Hall,
Yes,
for those
the
of you that
Reardon
don't
Hall.
remember.
And they will be open for 2 full weeks prior to the election. So I would encourage you to make sure you know your dates and times of when you can be there. But I think most people could probably find a day in one of those 2 weeks to get out and early vote if that's what they would like to do.
And that starts October
21st.
21st, and
It's a
it
Monday.
runs through the 1st of November?
It actually, I don't believe any of our locations in Bella Vista are open the day before the election. So the 4th, I don't believe either of the locations here are open on that day. But they run Monday through Friday for 2 full weeks before the election.
Okay, I gotcha.
And 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So people would be surprised to know that hour between 5 and 6 p.m. is typically not very busy. So if you had voters who were getting off work and they think that they've missed it for office hours, we are open till 6 for early voting.
Yeah, and another thing, say it's 15 minutes till 6, and there's a queue.
Right?
We don't just cut it off and say, sorry, it's 6 o'clock. If you're there,
Correct.
we take your vote.
That's right.
We have a cutoff spot.
Right, exactly. So the law says that anybody who is in line to vote at the close of the polls for that day for early voting or on election day, if you're in line before close of polls, you still get to vote that day.
Okay. Let's remind people what not to bring with them,
Okay.
because it's really hard on the poll workers to remind people not to wear that or whatever.
Yes. So there is something called electioneering. And electioneering in a nutshell is basically when somebody is wearing or displaying something that's either advocating for or advocating against a candidate or an issue that's on the ballot. So it would just be really, really helpful if our voters didn't bring those things with them when it comes time to vote. Because if they do, then our election officials are going to have to kindly ask them to remove those items or cover them up or that type of thing. So it would be really great. So what this could be is a button that has a candidate's name on it, or a sticker, or a hat with a slogan on it that's an official slogan of a campaign or a political party, those type of things. So we do have a marijuana issue on the ballot, so I would prefer that people not come in wearing a shirt with the marijuana plant on it. So that could be seen as electioneering as well. So best to just avoid anything like that. But after you vote, if you would like to wear and display your favorite candidate's logo or picture, go ahead.
You know, I've had to say, may I borrow your hat until you're finished voting? And then,
Yes.
yeah. Also, what about candidates? Are they allowed to stand there at the door and say, hey, vote for me, vote for me?
No, they're actually not. Candidates or anybody that's, campaigning on a candidate's behalf must be at least 100 feet away from the primary entrance to the vote center. So they can't be greeting you at the door and shaking your hands and say, hey, don't forget to vote for me while you're inside.
Or providing foods while you're in line.
Right, or, passing out literature like this is why you should vote for this issue or vote against this issue. So they do have to at least be 100 feet away from the primary entrance.
And that includes signs.
Yes.
And that's why all the signs are so far away from the front doors.
Yes, and the voting locations still do retain their personal property rights. So some locations have chosen not to allow any signs to be placed physically on their property, and that is up to the individual location. We do have that information available as far as what the different vote centers have determined as far as whether you can stand there and hold a sign on their property or affix a sign to their property. And that is available on the vote.bentoncountyar.gov website.
Say that again, the website.
So the website is vote.bentoncountyar.gov.
Okay. There's a lot of information out there.
There really is. And the thing I like about that is it's very specific to Benton County. And so the information that you can find on there, you can find all the voting locations that are open, both for early voting and election day, as well as hours. And you can also find a link to your sample ballot to know exactly what you're going to see when you go to vote, or links to special elections, or be able to read through those issues ahead of time before you show up to vote.
So if I'm in Pea Ridge and I come to vote, am I going to be able to see anybody municipal, the city, or any of the items that pertain to any other, like Bella Vista? Am I going to see the Bella Vista City Council candidates?
Not if you reside in Pea Ridge.
There you go.
So,
that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, you and I talked about it. I live in Rogers, so on my ballot, I'm going to see the city council races for Rogers. I won't see Bella Vista's. You, of course, would be just the opposite. You'll see the Bella Vista city council races, and you wouldn't see Rogers.
No matter where you vote, because
Correct.
it goes by your residence address.
Yes.
Okay.
So you are assigned to a precinct based on where you live. And so based on that precinct depends on what races you're eligible for.
But we would be eligible to vote for county, like the judges and the JPs and things that
The
pertain.
ones that pertain to you.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's important. I think people are like, well, I don't know. Am I going to see everything? Am I going to have to wade through all that? No, you're not.
Right. Now, there are some things that everybody's going to see.
Like?
So, specifically, obviously, the president. That's,
Yes.
I know that some people think that's the only thing we vote on once every 4 years, but that is the first thing that you'll see. And fun fact, there are actually 7 candidates for president that are on the ballot.
Really?
So, most people know of 2, but there are actually 7. So, feel free to look into each one of the 7 if you would like to make your decision. Also, you will see the U.S. Congress District 3, the office that's currently held by Congressman Womack. That is up for election. Everybody will see that. In addition, there's a state treasurer's race that everyone will see, as well as a runoff for state Supreme Court Chief Justice.
Okay. So are there any other, not pertaining to candidates, but any other things that you can share right now that will be on the ballot that we'll be voting on? I mean, we don't have, like what?
So everybody will see 3 statewide issues, and they will be at the very end of your ballot. So that's everybody statewide is going to see those. So there's issue 1, issue 2, and issue 3, very creatively named. But issue 1 is fairly short. It has to do with lottery proceeds. Issue 2 is kind of lengthy, has to do with casino licensing in Pope County and some other specific things. And issue 3 has to do with an expansion of the current medical marijuana law.
Okay.
So 2 and 3 are pretty lengthy. I would strongly encourage everybody to read through those ahead of time, because to read through them while standing in your voting booth,
it's thick.
It's lengthy.
Yes.
So, and it's not super easily understood just because of in my opinion, the legal language.
Sure.
So I would encourage everybody to look into that ahead of time. So that way you're just prepared to know how you're going to vote on those 3 issues.
Okay, that's good to know there are only 3 issues.
Yes.
Other than everything
Now,
else.
I think from what I've heard, there's still some legal wranglings going on at the state level to determine everything that's happening with that. So, but they are going to appear.
Okay. What a fun job you have. I'm kind of a nerd and a data miner, so I think that's fun.
Well, I'm kind of an election nerd. Not that I'm political, but just I love the process
Sure.
that we get to participate in to make sure that everybody gets to cast their vote.
It's kind of like producing a show, you know, when the curtain goes up, everything you've done in the background is available,
Yes.
you know.
It's a lot of work. It can be stressful at times, but overall, I really, really enjoy it.
You know, let's talk, before we forget, I want to do this twice. We've talked about the 2 places in Bella Vista for
Early voting.
Early voting, yes. But when on election day, we actually have 5 places here in Bella Vista.
Yes, that's correct.
And they are, I think she's going to, there they are, look at that.
Yeah, so in addition to the 2 we mentioned for early voting, they will also be open on Election Day, but you have the Highlands Methodist Church, the St. Bernard's Catholic Church, and also the Bella Vista Church of Christ.
Okay. The Bella Vista Church of Christ, funnily enough, has a Bentonville address, but
Yes.
it's okay.
It's right there on the edge.
It sure is.
And also, too, don't forget, the hours from early voting are different than the hours on Election Day.
Good point.
So early voting hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., whereas Election Day statewide at 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m.
Okay. And then your rest of your job happens after the polls close.
Yes. Then we at the Election Commission have some serious work to do at the end.
Absolutely. And don't forget that website, folks, that vote, say that again.
Yeah,
Vote.
so it's vote.ar, nope, I said it wrong, vote.bentoncountyar.gov.
Okay, and that tells you so many things. The candidates, it tells you, actually, the election results are posted there.
Yes, so on election night, we will post our preliminary results. And typically, the early voting and absentee results are released sometime shortly after the polls are closed in the evening, and we know that there are no longer voters in Benton County standing in line still to vote. So if they had been in line at 7:30 like we discussed,
Yeah.
we're not going to release results until we know that those people are done voting. But we do release early and absentee results, and then after the end of the evening, once all of the voting locations are able to bring back their ballots and things, we're able to compile our preliminary results, and those will be released at that same vote.bentoncountyar.gov website.
Okay. So what if I said to you, well, my vote doesn't count anyway? What would you say?
Well, that hurts my heart a little bit because I just feel so strongly that each one of us have an amazing opportunity to get to be a part of this process to elect our officials that are going to represent us. So every vote matters, but there are some specific things that most people don't realize, particularly on a local level. There have been some really close local races that were decided by just a couple votes. So that idea that my vote doesn't really matter is really not true. Even back in the primary this year, there was the Avoca Fire had a special election for their dues, and it failed by just 2 votes.
Oh,
So that's a very close race.
yes.
Back in, I believe it was 22, there was a school board race in Bentonville that didn't go to a runoff by just 1 vote. So those votes really do matter, particularly as you look closer at some of our municipal races and our local races.
Yeah, and let's talk about those runoffs.
Okay.
Because what we don't see a lot, or it doesn't appear to be, is, you know, you have all these, everybody votes, and then you have a runoff, and then 23 people vote. Oh, no.
Yeah,
Vote in those runoffs.
sure.
Because you might have had a really good, a candidate may have a really good chance going into it, and then nobody votes for the runoff and they don't win.
Yeah, and a lot of our larger cities in Benton County have the potential for runoffs this year. So if there's a runoff, obviously it's when more than 2 people are in a race, and neither gets a majority.
And the majority is
essentially.
51?
Well, not necessarily in municipalities. There's a funny little caveat for that. If there's, and I hope I don't get this wrong, it's if one candidate gets at least 40% and they're at least 20% ahead of their next closest opponent.
Okay.
So it's a little tricky when it comes to municipal races versus just getting 50% plus 1. So there are some specific things in there. But in general, anytime you have a more than 2-person race, you have a high probability of going to a runoff election.
Yes, you do.
So Bella Vista, Bentonville, Rogers, Centerton, Pea Ridge, Siloam Springs, all of them have potentials for runoffs this year, depending on what happens on election day.
Yes.
But
So please vote in those runoffs. Please,
Please.
vote. We don't want 23 people deciding who gets to be in that seat.
yeah, of course,
And I don't know why I'm saying 23,
but you might not be real far off on some races in the past.
Yeah.
But no, every election matters. And so if you're eligible, make sure that you're educating yourself about what you're going to vote on and who's there to vote for, and make sure you show up to vote.
Here's another goodie that a lot of people have a lack of understanding about. The state tried to prevent my candidate from getting elected by placing him on the bottom of the candidate list.
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember back to 2020 in our presidential race.
Yes.
Then there weren't 7 candidates for president, there were 17.
No way.
It was special. So somebody has to be in position number 1 and somebody has to be in position number 17, and obviously all of them in the middle. It's not, I don't get to pick who goes where. It's really just by random draw, and it happens in every single race, no matter how big or how small. We have a random ballot draw for the candidate order in the ballot, and it has already happened in Benton County. So
the candidate can either draw or you draw for them.
Right.
And,
or a
yeah,
representative for
a
the candidate
representative,
can draw.
yeah.
Or if nobody's there, somebody in the commission will draw on their behalf.
So, Julie, you can't trust those voting machines, right?
Yes, you can. And I know I have a unique position because I do work with them all of the time to say that. But what people don't really realize is a couple things on why I feel strongly that you can trust the voting machine. Number 1, they're not connected to the internet.
Right.
So this idea that somebody is going to go hack them would be very difficult, as they are not connected to the internet. So the touchscreen voting machines that you make your selections on, those are never connected to the internet. The ballot box, the ballot tabulators, those are never connected to the internet. The computer that we tally our results on, that is not connected to the internet. They don't even contain the capabilities within those pieces of machinery to be connected to the internet. So that's the first thing that I would encourage people to understand. The second thing is we do very, very extensive testing before all of our elections, but particularly these large elections. For example, our primary election that we held earlier this year, we tested about, I'm seeing my notes are on the back, right? We tested almost 140,000 ballots.
Wow.
And we tested all of our pieces of equipment. In comparison to how many voters we actually had show up for the primary, which was just under 34,000. So we did massively more extensive testing than we actually had votes to tally. And we do that in a process that we vote the ballots in our testing in a known outcome. So then we run them through the tabulators to make sure that they are tabulating according to the outcome that we know it should have. in our testing. Of course, we never have any idea what the outcome is going to be in a regular election. That's the will of the people.
You know, Julie, I could talk to you forever, but I think we're almost out of time.
Okay.
And I can't thank you enough again for being here today. I really hope, Bella Vista, that you pay attention to this. I'm going to be posting it in a lot of places.
Great.
And don't forget that website. That's really important.
Yes.
And so we will see you at the polls. Until next month, this has been Leslie.